The 2024 season is officially upon us with the Seahawks set to kick things off at home against the Broncos on Sunday. Which players are going to stand out as the best of the best for the Seahawks this season? It's time for us to predict awards coming up here on our Tuesday episode of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, here on our Tuesday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're tuning in nearby Marysville, Washington, or across the country, actually north of the border in Toronto, Canada. We appreciate each and every one of you. We are drawing closer to week one, practice kicking off for game week tomorrow for the Seahawks as they gear up for the Broncos at Lumen Field. We're going to take a deeper dive into the Denver Broncos, some things that jump out about Seattle's upcoming week one opponent, things to keep in mind of, whether it's offensive line, defense, new quarterback, number of different topics that we're going to be delving into in our latest Enemy Confidential. And of course, we've got our mailbag, which is going to be moving to Tuesdays this year. Looking forward to answering your questions on today's show, which is brought your way by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. We are now less than a week away from kickoff. Week one, Seahawks Broncos at Lumen Field. A lot of excitement with Mike Macdonald entering his first season as the new head coach for the Seahawks. And of course, plenty of exciting young players, experienced players returning. A roster that certainly was not a bare cupboard for Mike Macdonald coming in, replacing Pete Carroll. Now that we are closing in on week one, Rob, as we do every year, hey, we've had our statistical predictions. Now it's time to predict awards, and we're going to fly through these. Going to start with our first one, the obvious one, the most valuable player. And I know that this is one that could have a low-hanging fruit, but I'm curious to see what's going on in the mind of Mr. Rob Rang when it comes to MVP.
Well, you're giving me an easy one to start off, Corbin. I think in the prediction show, maybe it serves well to have an easy one. I'm going to say Geno Smith. I think that we're going to see similar statistics than what we saw a couple of years ago: 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 3-to-1 ratio, 4,200 passing yards, leading the NFL in the completion percentage. I think all of those are attainable this year in Ryan Grubb's offense, just considering Geno Smith's talent, what we've seen so far, the skill position talent around him, and the fact that I do believe this is the best offensive line that we have seen in several years in Seattle.
This is going to surprise some of our listeners because I've been talking Geno Smith up all off season. I've been talking him up in training camp. I think he's going to have a big year, but I'm going to go with a pivot here. I think Devin Witherspoon, this is the Devin Witherspoon era. I think Devin Witherspoon is going to be one of those rare defensive players that might end up in the discussion for MVP at some point because of all of the things that he does at an elite level: rushing the passer, interceptions, pass breakups, blowing up run plays. Just the way that he plays the game. I think Devin Witherspoon has a superstar written all over him. So I'm actually going to go with a defensive player here. Geno Smith would be second for me, but I'm going Devin Witherspoon as Seattle's MVP in 2024. Now let's shift over to defensive player of the year. I'm actually going to do offensive player of the year since, I actually buck trends here. But who is your defensive player of the year for the Seahawks in 2024?
Well, you just took the words right out of my mouth as far as Devin Witherspoon. I just think that the way that he is going to be used in this defense, just how instinctive that he is. Obviously, you still have some concerns about durability when you're built the way that Devin Witherspoon is and play with the physicality that he does. That it always makes you nervous. But I do think that he has that type of upside. So he's my choice for defensive player of the year.
And on offensive player of the year, we're just going to be flipping here. Geno Smith, to me, the guy that's running the show, I just love the way that his skill set meshes with this offensive scheme for Ryan Grubb. I said it the other day, I think 35 touchdowns is very doable in this offense. I think the red zone offense is going to be much better. And I just think with the weapons he's got at his disposal, look, we could give some love to some of those receivers. Ken Walker III maybe has a big season, but this team is going to go where Geno Smith takes them. And so he's my offensive player of the year. Now let's switch to rookie of the year. And this one is going to maybe be the easiest one that we have on here, although I will admit to you, Rob, that there was part of me that was wanting to go out into left field on this one.
Well, I didn't want to go in left field. I wanted to go to inside linebacker, and I thought about Tyrese Knight, and I really do believe that with Jerome Baker not seeing much time over training camp, the preseason, there's a possibility that Tyrese Knight winds up leading this team in tackles. Ultimately, I think that's going to be Tyrell Dodson. Ultimately, I think that the most big plays from any rookie for the Seahawks is going to be the first-round pick, Byron Murphy the second. Come on, Corbin. We got to ask tougher questions than this at this point.
Well, if Christian Haynes isn't starting, I'm not going to be picking him. I thought about leaning that way, but we don't know yet. I mean, the depth chart is unofficial. Maybe Christian Haynes did win that job and they're just playing some gamesmanship, but it's got to be Byron Murphy II. He's going to have the biggest role. If this was mid-season, maybe Tyrese Knight by that time is starting for this football team and we can start to have a little different discussion. But right now, it's pretty obvious. I actually thought about D. Williams for this, by the way. That was another name that I considered here. Let's switch gears now to most improved. And this was actually one that I was torn on. There were 3 different names that I was considering here. Who pops off the tape for you as the most improved player?
Well, I want to go to the defensive side of the ball. As you said before, with Devin Witherspoon as the MVP of this squad. And I really do believe that's where you're going to see a massive change because, of course, Seattle's offense has played pretty good football over the last couple of years. So if the Seahawks are going to get back to the postseason, then it's going to have to be a turnaround on defense. And so I want to say a player like a Tariq Woolen comes back, a Boye Mafe goes from star level to superstardom or somebody like that. But the player I'm coming back to is actually Jackson Smith-Njigba. Look, anybody who watched Seahawks football last year knows that JSN played really, really good ball, especially toward the end of the season. I mean, he was their guy that he and Geno Smith that made so many game-winning plays. I think that he goes into another stratosphere this season. You said before, and I'm going to give you the credit, that JSN could absolutely lead this team in receptions, perhaps even in receiving yards this year. So I do think that that's a good possibility. So he is the player that I think is going to be a guy that's the most improved.
That would be the low-hanging fruit here, but I'm going to go to defense in large part because, look, we'll see if Uchenna Nwosu week against the Broncos. My gut's telling me that they're probably going to play cautious. He might miss a game or two. But Derek Hall has been the most improved player on the practice field from the start of OTAs till the end of training camp of the preseason. And I just think that he is playing with a level of confidence that we did not see his rookie season. I think Derek Hall is going to take a massive jump. I don't know if he's as impactful as JSN is, but JSN had a better rookie season than what Derek Hall did. I think Derek Hall is going to go out and get 5-6 sacks maybe for this football team. I think he's going to be much better against the run. I'm just looking forward to seeing him go out there and play at the level we know he's capable of, because last year just didn't seem like the confidence was quite there. That has not been the case in training camp in the preseason. I'm really excited to see what Derek Hall is going to do here. Let's go to the trenches now. Top linemen, and this could be offense or defense, but you have to pick one or the other, Rob. We can't go with both. You have to get one player, top lineman for the Seahawks.
Well, and that, again, is the challenge because there's so many defensive linemen that you want to highlight. We talked about Byron Murphy II. I really think that one of the best linemen on the team is Jarran Reed. But when it's all said and done, if the Seahawks, again, are going to compete, then they have to maintain what we've seen on the offensive side of the ball. One of the players that I've been most impressed with and just in his steady development is the left tackle, Charles Cross. If he does not play at a Pro Bowl level, I don't think that Geno Smith can come even close to the numbers that you and I just thought or just projected that he could do. So Charles Cross is my lineman of the year for the Seahawks in 2024.
I'm going to stay on the offensive line, too. I thought about Leonard Williams. I thought about Jonathan Hankins just because I'm really excited about him playing that nose tackle spot. But I'm going to go with the new center. I am bullish on the addition of Connor Williams, and I expect Charles Cross is going to make a big leap at left tackle. In fact, I predicted the other day I think he's going to be an all-pro, a second-team all-pro. That is my prediction. But I think the glue guy for this offensive line is going to be Connor Williams, who looks good. He looks healthy. Will he play this week? We don't know yet, but that one I'm leaning towards a really good chance that he's going to be playing in week 1 against the Broncos. Top 5 center when he's healthy. That is a huge difference maker for this football team. And I think Connor Williams playing for a playoff caliber Seahawks team can get to his first Pro Bowl and maybe be an all-pro himself. that is a huge difference maker at the center position. Real quick, our last one, top specialist, maybe the most important one on here. Let's give some credit to the specialist. Who's your top specialist for the Seahawks in 2024?
Corbin, you could go with the low-hanging fruit here. I mean, you got an all-pro punter. You've got a kicker who's very, very good. You got a sledgehammer and a potential kick returner in Laviska Shenault. And yet, I am going to go with the undrafted free agent from Tennessee, D. Williams. I've been kind of tooting his horn here for a while because I'm telling you, in the return game, you're going to see Laviska Shenault break some tackles. He's going to make some fun plays. D. Williams is going to break one and get you 6. And that's the reason why I think that he's going to wind up being the special teams player of the year for the Seahawks this season.
I'm going to go with Jason Myers because it's 2024. And I know he missed a couple extra points in the preseason. That has been something that has followed him his entire career. He's missed more extra points than any kicker. He's like a 3-point specialist that can't make free throws sometimes. Just really struggles though. But booming 58-yarder in the preseason finale. I've been watching him kick 60-yarders in practice pretty regularly. Get him through the uprights, and it's an even year. You got to go with Jason Myers being 90+% making field goals. And if that happens, that's going to be a major boost for the Seahawks to maybe turn the tide on a game or two this year to get into the postseason. When we come back, it's time for our Tuesday mailbag. We're going to answer as many questions as we can from our valued listeners. That's coming up next here on Locked On Seahawks. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel on this podcast, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. You can bet on everything from Geno Smith's under-the-radar MVP odds to Tyrese Knight as a deep sleeper to be rookie of the year. Maybe Mike Macdonald as coach of the year in his first season with the Seahawks. Just throw in a $5 bet and you'll get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Tuesday edition. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We switched things up during the course of all the years we've been doing Locked On Seahawks. Normally, we have a Monday mailbag, and maybe eventually that'll return. But we're going to move it to Tuesdays this year because this is the perfect opportunity when we've had the recap episode, looking back at however games play out, that we can let our listeners chime in a little bit, get some questions about this football team. And so it's time for our Tuesday mailbag. And this is all going to be live. We're getting these questions that are coming through on social media right now. And Rob, we got to start off first with a question that is coming from an unlikely place here to open our show. Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl director himself, who has been on our show. We are grateful for Jim coming on the show every year post-draft, and one of our favorite guests, one of our favorite people in football. But he had a question for us, Rob, coming from Jim Nagy. Who gets double-digit sacks this season? A, Boye Mafe, B, Derek Hall, or C, both? I wonder if there's any certain interest here that could be resulting in this question.
Well, I think for one, I mean, Jim Nagy, obviously a former Seahawks scout, as you said, Senior Bowl executive, and, both those players, Derek Hall, Boye Mafe, had, unbelievable performances in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. So, as you often say, Corbin, thank you to all of our listeners, viewers. Thank you, obviously, to Jim. I mean, just proving what just a nice guy he is, but also a talented scout. I mean, the reality is that Derek Hall, at least in my opinion, and presumably in yours, based on some of the things that you said earlier, Jim's possibly as well, Derek Hall has been the most physical player on either side of the ball for the Seahawks so far throughout training camp in the preseason, and at least in my opinion, certainly. And so I understand the thought that maybe Derek Hall is going to take this massive leap. I mean, the reality is he took a massive leap between his sophomore and junior seasons at Auburn, went from 3.5 sacks to 9 sacks, and went from a part-time starter to a first-team All-SEC kind of a player, and obviously led to the Seahawks selecting him when they did. I think that he is going to become a foundational piece of Mike Macdonald's defense. As I said, his physicality is incredible. But at the same time, you got Boye Mafe, who had 9 sacks a year ago in 16 games. I think that he is going to start more games and likely because of his speed. And it's close. I looked it up, and Boye Mafe had a 4.53. Just unbelievable 40-yard dash time, by the way, for a 250-pound edge rusher. Derek Hall had a 4.55. So, but there's one particular play in the preseason. It's why I'm going to say that I think that Boye Mafe not only is going to be the only Seahawks edge rusher, only Seahawks defender to get probably 10 sacks this year. I think that there's going to be so many mouths to feed that you're not going to see a lot of guys get these double-digit sacks. I think that you're going to see Derek Hall probably get that maybe 7 to 8. But I think that Boye Mafe has a chance at double digits. So I'm going to go with Boye Mafe. But ultimately, the one play I saw in the preseason that really impressed me with Mafe and why I'm going to go in that direction is he had a play against the Chargers in week 1 in the preseason. Easton Stick ran a 4.6 in the 40-yard dash, quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers. And Boye Mafe in a flash closed on him. And it's that kind of closing speed why I think that Mafe is ultimately going to wind up leading the Seahawks in sacks this season. Be the one guy that has double digit, but I bet you there's 5 or 6 guys that have 5 or 6 or 7 sacks for the Seahawks this year. And they wind up being one of the most productive quarterback sacking teams in all of the NFL this year.
For the record, I'm in agreement with you. Mafe is the player to me because he got to 9 last year. And I know, I'm going to be honest with you, I thought Derek Hall had a better training camp at preseason, but yet at the same time, there just is a little different burst there from Boye Mafe on the field with pads on. And I just have a feeling that Mike Macdonald is going to be able to scheme up more opportunities for him to be able to get after the quarterback. I think Derek Hall, I mentioned it earlier, 5 or 6 sacks to me is probably the sweet spot for him this year. That would be a big jump, not having any sacks last year. I don't see both these guys getting to double digits, but Boye Mafe certainly is a player that I think has a strong chance to do so. Our next question here that is coming from Insano Brandon here on Twitter. Whenever Connor Williams ends up playing for, and if he plays well, do you foresee a situation where the Seahawks will be compelled to get him on a long-term deal? And how do you see that affecting Cross Mafe, given that they'll both be due contracts after 2025? This is an excellent question because Connor Williams is one of those classic cases. Player coming off injury, you get him at a discount for the talent that he is. You get a 1-year deal, $6 million. This player is worth more than $6 million a year when he's healthy in terms of comparing with other centers out there. My viewpoint on this is you got to be willing to prioritize the trenches more than what the Seahawks have the last 10, 12 years on the offensive line. There's been too many times they've gone cheap on the offensive line and paid elsewhere. I think they paid for that on the field a lot of times. I think that's impacted their playoff games. So if Connor Williams comes in and he plays like he's capable of and he's fully healthy, doesn't have any more injuries this year, and plays at that Pro Bowl, All-Pro level, you've got to find a way to lock him up. That's one of the few times John Schneider has got to be saying, you know what, I don't like doing deals middle of the season, but let's get this done. Let's see if we can get you extended. And we'll worry about getting Cross and Mafe too, but they at least have another year under contract, so we have some time. Let's get Connor Williams now. To me, he's 27. He's still a younger player. That could be a foundational piece for your offensive line.
It absolutely could. I would just say this, at least in my opinion, outsider looking into the organization, obviously, I still view Connor Williams as a guy who has to make up some ground because Charles Cross and Boye Mafe are guys that, you know, the Seahawks drafted. And of course, are young players still in their first contract. So I just think that Connor Williams has to be that guy, he has to be that damn good. And then he also has to demonstrate that he wants to come back. Charles Cross, Boye Mafe, everything I've seen from them is that they want to be, again, foundational pieces of the Seahawks for the long term. So I think that there's a possibility. I think you want to bring Connor Williams back. That's what you're hoping for, but not necessarily at the price of losing an all-pro candidate at the left tackle position, as you projected earlier, and a guy that I think can end up leading the Seahawks a very improved defense this year in sacks. Boye Mafe's going to be looking to splash in free agency as well. I will say this about Boye Mafe: if Derek Hall has the big, breakout season that we're talking about, then Boye Mafe might be actually the one who could be on the outside looking in, just because of the dollars that the Seahawks would already have to allocate to other positions.
Yep, those are all puzzle pieces that go into this. There's no question about it. So my opinion, hey, I think you've had way too many years you have not invested in the center position. If you got a really good one, make sure you invest in him. This question coming from Disintegrator: why are the Seahawks still working out wide receivers for the practice squad? So this is off the news report today. We actually were going to talk about this in the first segment, but because it was a visit, we decided today, hey, we've already got the mailbag. We've got a couple questions about this. Kadarius Toney, formerly of the New York Giants and the Kansas City Chiefs, said, you want to talk about a player who has really been a mixed bag since he came into the league. There's been some plays where you've seen the first round talent that he brought with him out of Florida, but you've also seen the abundance of dropped passes, the injuries, the inconsistency, questions about his work ethic. There's all kinds of red flags and white flags here when you're a team looking at Kadarius Toney. I will say this, though. I don't think there's any reason to get fired up about practice squad related visits. You know, if Kadarius Toney was going to potentially be knocking a guy like Laviska Shenault off this roster, then yes, I would have a major issue with that. Laviska Shenault earned his spot on this team. And quite frankly, Laviska Shenault has had a better career to this point than what Kadarius Toney has had overall. But this guy, he does have traits. He is oozing with traits that in the right offense, maybe Ryan Grubb could be the guy that could unlock that. If Andy Reid couldn't, I don't know about that. But maybe Ryan Grubb's the guy that could do it. You get him on the practice squad, you ease him into the offense, and maybe he's the guy that can help you at some point. To me, the practice squad is a totally different game. You're always moving guys on and off the roster on the practice squad. So I have no issues with Kadarius Toney. And honestly, there's no such thing as having too many receivers in this league. You have a few guys get banged up. How nice would that insurance policy be to bring in a guy that has that kind of talent, and if he's able to put things together, could be an impact player for you, making up for injuries?
Yeah, no question about it. And ultimately, what it comes down to is Kadarius Toney is getting opportunities, whether it be the Seahawks or anywhere else, because of three numbers: 4, 3, 8. That's it. It's a 40-yard dash, and the guy can absolutely fly. And because of that upside, he's going to get his opportunities. Look, as you mentioned, Laviska Shenault earned his spot on this roster. Hell, so did Easop Winston, who is the guy that actually lost that practice squad spot, at least at this point. Easop Winston is a guy that I think is a really quality football player that would make an awful lot of sense for the Seahawks. I just think that that Kadarius Toney has a game-breaking ability that you have to investigate. And so I understand why the Seahawks are doing their due diligence. It's not that I necessarily expect them to sign Kadarius Toney, but if they do so, I could see the impact ability that he would have in Ryan Grubb's scheme as the deep threat that, frankly, I've been arguing for a while now that the Seahawks have been lacking.
And our last question here, Rob, this is going to be a fun one, coming from Ryan Katz. Devin as the last name when announcing the defense at home last weekend, a spot formerly held by Bobby Wagner. Does this mean everything I think it means about who the new leader of this defensive squad is? I know where I stand on this, but I'm sure that you and I know our listeners want us to argue against each other sometimes, but I don't know how you can argue that Devin Witherspoon is not the face of this defense now.
Hey, he might be the face of the team. Just the enthusiasm with which he, walks around with, practices with, plays in every preseason game that you saw. Obviously, we had these 3 preseason games, whether it be a play on special teams, offense, or defense. Devin Witherspoon, whether he had his pads on or not, he was the guy rushing onto the field to celebrate with his teammates. So, yeah, I think that there's a possibility that Devin Witherspoon should be the next legend in waiting basically for the Seahawks, but we're getting the car so far ahead of the horse here. Devin Witherspoon have to earn this, but there's no doubt about it. The excitement is palpable in Seattle about number 21, and I'm excited to see what he might be able to bring the Seahawks this year.
We talked about this during training camp and during OTAs, even how a second-year player that is still a really young player, how the veterans were going to Devin Witherspoon when they were watching the big screen they've got on the side of the field after plays. They were picking Devin Witherspoon's brain. Julian Love obviously is another player that gets this as well, but I saw Julian Love go over to Devin Witherspoon a few times, and they were trying to point some stuff out like, what do you think? Devin Witherspoon is the leader of this defense. And hearing Leonard Williams talk about just the way that he commands the huddle and the way that his infectious energy impacts the rest of this defense, he checks off all of those boxes. So, hey, I picked him as my MVP earlier in this show. And one of the reasons that I did is because I think that he is the face of this franchise moving forward. I think Devin Witherspoon is that guy. So on defense, absolutely, there's a reason he's being introduced last, because this is his show. And he's going to be looking to be entering into superstardom here for the Seahawks moving forward. When we come back, we got week 1 coming up, Denver Broncos. Yesterday, we looked at what's new as far as additions and departures. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into some position groups and some stats, some factoids about this Broncos team that should be of interest heading into Seattle's season opener. That'll be coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. You shouldn't have to skip a mortgage payment when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, and comedy near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. My wife and I had the privilege of seeing Five Finger Death Punch and Metallica at Lumen Field on Sunday night. What a show that was, playing in the Seahawks grounds. And we got to do it being down in the actual field, the general admission for under $250. That's a pretty dang good deal to see one of the legendary bands out there in Metallica, and we got it off Game Time. Game Time has deals on tickets right at the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. This episode of Locked On Seahawks is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you'd do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a little bit more time to lift weights to go with my preparing for half marathons. The best way to squeeze the special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters to you so you could do more of it. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs. It can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s listening. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks will kick off their regular season against the Denver Broncos on Sunday at Lumen Field. Yesterday, we had our first peek at the Denver Broncos, a team that's had plenty of changes on offense and defense, including a new starting quarterback. Russell Wilson's out. Rookie Bo Nix going to be making his regular season debut at Lumen Field in front of the 12s on Sunday. We're going to peel the curtain back a little bit more now, Rob, and talk about the offense, defense, special teams for the Broncos, maybe some factoids that jump out, some things that we saw in the preseason, but really pulling that curtain back and getting a better idea of what this Denver Broncos squad looks like as they get ready to head out to Lumen Field and try to pull a week 1 upset against the Seahawks.
Yeah, and that's where I want to start off the conversation. As you said, I mean, obviously, it's no longer Russell Wilson is under center at the quarterback position for the Denver Broncos. It's Bo Nix. And, having been on the road to scout players, for the last 25 years at this point, I feel very comfortable in my evaluation of Bo Nix and basically just in the improvement, his journey, frankly, from Auburn to Oregon to now the Denver Broncos as a as a celebrated and as a controversial first round pick. And just the way that Bo Nix has carried himself to me suggests that he is in fact the guy that the Denver Broncos have been looking for. And does that mean that I think that he's going to come into Seattle and get the victory? Not necessarily, but I do think that he carries himself with a composure that is indicative of the 61 games as a starter that he had at the college level. I just think that at the quarterback position, confidence is really important. and his ability to kind of just manage situations, I think is, and of course his quick release, the way that he fits into Sean Payton's offense, to me is absolutely going to make him somebody to watch, and somebody that that I feel confident is going to have some success in the NFL. I also wanted to talk about for a moment the best player that I saw from the Denver Broncos. And I've been fortunate enough, the Broncos have allowed me to come into their training camp here the last 3 years running. And their cornerback, Patrick Surtain, we're going to be talking about him in tomorrow's show. I promise you, Corbin.
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about the breakdown of the different matchups. But I think that Patrick Surtain is among the, I don't know, handful, 10 best players, regardless of position, in all of the NFL. And I happen to be in Denver when they had a joint practice with the Green Bay Packers. And my focus is on the third and fourth string guys, the guys who aren't going to make the roster, because I'm there to evaluate players for the Football League. But when you see a player break up basically every throw that's gone in his direction, I think he had, I wasn't focusing in on him again, but I think that he had 3 interceptions in that practice against the Packers. He was dominant. And just considering how much we highlight the Seahawks cornerbacks, again, Patrick Surtain is one of those players that I think is worth the price of admission just on his own. And so, again, I want to kind of pull the curtain back, as you said, into some of the players that even from a scout's perspective, and there's an awful lot of really good scouts out there. I don't call myself, special in that regard, but the some of the best players out there, both in college and the NFL, the Denver Broncos have on their sidelines. So it's going to be a fascinating week 1 matchup.
Going back to the quarterback situation real quick, and we hit on this a little bit yesterday. Bo Nix is a totally different style quarterback from Russell Wilson. Are they both dual threat quarterbacks? Absolutely. But the way that they use their legs and the way they improvise, 2 totally different players. Bo Nix is going to stay on schedule much more than Russell Wilson ever did. And look, I'm not taking shots at Russell Wilson with that. How many games did he win for the Seahawks with his ability to work off schedule? There were way more highs than lows in that regard in his 10 years in Seattle. Could it be frustrating sometimes, especially for the offensive lineman? Yes, but Bo Nix is not that player. Bo Nix is going to get the football out of his hands. Sean Payton's offense, it is a timing-based offense. Drew Brees was a master running that offense for years, getting the football out in a timely manner. Bo Nix, I'm not saying he's the next Drew Brees, but he has that DNA. He has that ability to get the football out quickly, to understand what the play is asking him to do. Sean Payton is not asking his quarterback to put on a Superman cape and try to become Russell Wilson 2.0. He is wanting a quarterback that's going to play within structure, is going to play within what the play design is, get the football out quickly, help your offensive line, and allow the playmakers to make plays. So the Seahawks are going to have to be prepared for a totally different offense from that standpoint. What this Broncos team looked like offensively last year with Russell Wilson is going to be way different than what we see with Bo Nix just because of their play styles. But I think that also plays into the statistic that jumped out to me the most. When I was doing some research today, I've got more research to go with the film that I've watched. I was really impressed by Denver's offensive line after they overcame that rough start last year where they lost several games during the season. The offensive line was great. And I was looking at Pro Football Focus charting, and there's subjectivity to this, Rob, obviously, but of the 22 quarterbacks who had enough snaps that qualified for this, the Broncos had the lowest percentage of pressures that were charged against them. Now, some of that's Russell Wilson holding onto the ball and the way that he does things, but the Broncos were dead last in that category, and that is a good thing. That means your offensive line at 70.8% of the time was being charged with pressures. That means almost 30% of the pressures were on Russell Wilson. The offensive line was not to blame for that. And again, there's some subjectivity to this, but the film matches up. The offensive line, you could tell the frustration a lot of the time, like, get the ball out, Russell Wilson. We are blocking. We are doing what we're supposed to do, and then we're not getting the play executed. Having a quarterback that is going to play within that structure is only going to make that offensive line that much better, especially a guy like Quinn Miners. If you want to watch a highlight reel of offensive linemen in the run game, there's a reason Quinn Miners got paid this offseason. The dude just absolutely mauls people. Second highest graded run blocking guard in the NFL last year. I think he should have been first. The guy's film is amazing. He has made that leap that you and I thought he might after a couple of years coming out of a Division III school. But this is an offensive line that has a lot of talent, and they did a really good job protecting the quarterback, and at times they were snake bitten by Russell Wilson's playing style. They're not going to have that issue with Bo Nix. And so I do think from a stylistic standpoint that Sean Payton's got a lot of the ingredients he needs for this offense to be more efficient. Is it going to be more productive? Time will tell with a rookie quarterback, but there are some ingredients here that make this an intriguing team going into this season.
Yeah, no question about it. I'll mention another player. You kind of went on a deep dive there with Quinn Miners. Love it. Small school guys. Everybody's going to focus on quarterbacks. Let's kind of avoid, or all pro corners, like I mentioned before. The Broncos have a linebacker, Alex Singleton, number 49, that is he's a fun story. The Seahawks actually signed him as an undrafted free agent out of Montana State. I think it was back in 2015. Actually, we referred to Jim Nagy before. Jim Nagy was on the Seahawks scouting staff at that point. He wasn't the scout in Montana State, but I think that was Tyler Nabry actually going back. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is that with Alex Singleton, we're talking about a linebacker who came into the Seahawks as an undrafted free agent. He bounced around a couple of different teams. I think it was the Patriots and the Eagles.
Eagles had him for a couple of years.
Yeah. They did, yeah. Patriots and Vikings early on. He bounces back to the CFL, actually. Canadian Football League, Calgary Stampeders. And it was an unbelievable player. I mean, they call it MVP in the NFL. We call it MOP, most outstanding player. He was the MOP, the most outstanding defensive player in 2017. His Canadian Football League debut was against my BC Lions. He's a good football player. As you said, he went to the he had a couple of years in the CFL. He goes back to the Philadelphia Eagles, didn't play that much, signs on a contract with the Denver Broncos, and pops. In this past season, Corbin, at 30 years old, he signs a 3-year, $18 million contract, 9 of it guaranteed. For a 30-year-old former undrafted free agent, I am fascinated by this football game because the Denver Broncos, the Seahawks, the old uniforms, the new start to the season, so many different reasons. I'm still a fan of Alex Singleton as a player, the Seahawks as a scouting staff, the Denver Broncos, the resiliency of the player himself, to me, just makes this that much more of a fascinating matchup. So I just love the fact that we're kind of breaking this game from that, a small of an era.
And I'm going to go to the pass rush real quick. And yesterday we talked Jonathan Cooper and his story being a guy that's kind of come on here the last year and a half. Nick Bonitto is another player that I would keep a very close eye on. And you and I both liked him coming out of Oklahoma. I had a late second-round grade on him. That was around when the Broncos, I think they picked him in the third. But he is a player that I think could absolutely create problems for Seattle's tackles, especially without Abraham Lucas being in the lineup. George Fant, that's going to be a test because Nick Bonitto has that rocket booster on his shoes, his ability to get downfield. This is a Broncos defensive line that statistically last year didn't rank among the best, but Zach Allen had a good first year there. You've got Bonitto and Cooper. There's a lot of excitement coming out of Denver with that defensive line, and I think there should be with some of the young talent. They've got varying skill sets there as well. They got to keep those players off of Geno Smith, and that's obviously going to be a big part of matchup Wednesday tomorrow. So a perfect segue into our Wednesday episode. As always, thank you to all the 12s for listening and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Make sure to follow me on Twitter. I know it's X, but I'm still going to call it Twitter, and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can also follow Rod at Rob Rang, and make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Tomorrow, we are so excited. Drum roll, please. Matchup Wednesday returns. We're going to be diving into the key matchups to watch when the Seahawks are on offense against the Broncos and when the Seahawks defense is trying to slow down Bo Nix and company for Denver's offense. We'll be diving into that tomorrow. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night. Go Hawks.